Good morning to you all, and welcome to this local review body for the 24th of April of this year, 2023. First of all, before we proceed, I would like to introduce the top table. I'm Councillor Bob Braun. I'm the convener of the committee. To my right is Councillor Grant Stewart, and to my left, Councillor Hugh Anderson. We are all by necessity members of the Planning and Placemaking Committee. To my far right is Mr. Ross Burton. Mr. Burton is their independent planning consultant who has had no dealings with these cases at all until they were sent through to the local review body. To my left, beyond Councillor Anderson, is Mr. Colin Elliott, our legal advisor for this morning, and to his left, Miss Jessica Guild, who is from Committee Services. So following from the agenda, members can ask if we have any declarations of interest. Councillor Stewart.
No declarations of interest.
And Councillor Anderson?
None.
Thank you. We have the minutes of the last meeting. As I was the only one present as the convener, I'm happy to approve those on this occasion, so they're approved. So with that, we have a full agenda this morning, so we'll move on to the first item. I think the gentleman there, you're involved with the first item. So Mr. Burton, if I could ask you to introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. For the first item, I don't have the too many photographs to show you. I'll take you through the ones I have. The first picture, please, shows the application site in relation to the High Street. You can see it, the red line accessed through a narrow pend just at the back of the High Street. Next slide, please. The pend is to the right of the Nationwide. You can see a white part of the frontage and a door set within that. So that's the entrance to the application site. Next slide, please. That's looking down the pend, which on the day I was there, I wasn't able to gain access to. Next slide, please. And that's the application site from the Scott Street car park. The application site is on the other side of the building with dormers that you can see between that and the back of the building on the High Street. So the application is for the change of use and alterations to a store and attic to form a house, a dwelling house. The application property is accessed via a pen from the High Street. It forms part of a two-storey building situated between the three-storey building at 208 High Street and the three-storey building which fronts onto the Scott Street car park. The applicant has submitted photos of the entrance and internals of the property on pages 45 and 56 of the appeal submission, which are useful. The proposed accommodation is a kitchen, living room and shower room on the ground floor and a bedroom on an upper floor. Following discussions between the applicant and the case officer, the upper floor is proposed as an open gallery type space, which should allow the proposed roof lights to light the staircase, part of the ground floor and the upper floor. An artist's impressions of the proposals can be viewed on pages 47 to 50 of the appeal submission. To summarise the applicant's case, Edinburgh and Dundee's planning policies both encourage studio apartment floor layouts which are comparable to the appeal case. Contrary to the planning officer's view, the internal living space is suitable and does offer a type of accommodation which is lacking in the city centre and would appeal to young people or first-time buyers. Contrary to the planning officer's view, the proposal does create a coherent structure of space and buildings. The benefit of a site visit will clarify and confirm the enhancements proposed, which would make a positive contribution to city centre living. The proposal proposes a safe, accessible and easily navigable place. There are other precedent cases for granting planning permission for one-bedroom residential properties and converted vacant buildings in city centre locations. Other planning authorities, such as Edinburgh, positively encourage studio or apartment living in smaller spaces, which are equally able to provide suitable living accommodation to the target market. There were no objections to the proposals from any neighbours, nor any concerns raised by stakeholders consulted by the planning authority. To summarise the report of handling, Policy 11, Perth City Centre Secondary Uses Area, promotes a mix of different appropriate uses, including residential. The principle of introducing new residences in this part of the city centre may be acceptable, subject to assessment of placemaking matters, including design and layout and residential amenity. The placemaking supplementary guidance states that backland development consisting of one or more dwellings situated immediately behind one another is generally unsatisfactory in any location, but particularly when sited on modest-sized plots or sharing a single access due to associated problems with overlooking, noise and light disturbance, general loss of amenity, and adverse impact on the character of the area. The primary entrance would be some 25 metres on the high street frontage, access to a lit pen for the first 10 metres, then along an unlit venel to the proposed entrance door. The open-air venel is flanked by a single-storey commercial building to the east, with no active frontages at ground level, and 6 air conditioning units mounted above head height, whereas the western boundary is characterised by a mixture of high walls and corrugated steel sheets, which separate the venel from a private car park. The access would be unwelcoming and without a sense of safety. The only vertical window which would serve the proposed ground floor space would look directly onto a neighbouring building across a gap of 0.73 metres, so the amount of natural light from this window would be limited. The revised drawings show a first floor gallery with 2 additional roof windows intended to serve both the bedroom and the kitchen living space below. A proposed door between the space and the entrance hallway was also re-annotated as being glazed in the revised drawings. While these revisions have improved matters, the proposed ground floor space would still be dark and overly reliant on artificial lighting during daylight hours. The internal quality of the proposed dwelling would be poor and would be further exacerbated by an unwelcoming approach route which would lack a sense of safety for occupants and visitors. In these respects, the proposal fails to accord with Policy 1B placemaking and the associated placemaking supplementary guidance. There were no representations to the application. Material considerations, policies 11 and 1B as identified, are relevant. Some observations: the proposed flat would have a poor outlook and unattractive access, but the revised designs would give more daylight to both levels of accommodation. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. I have a question. When I went to see it, you said you couldn't get through the front gate. I got through, it was open, so got part of the way through. Security and lighting, can we condition those? I'm looking at the picture on page 47, the artist impression, shows that a higher fence, paving obviously done with lighting. And it would be very dark, I would think, if you're walking through. So are we able to condition more secure fencing, lighting, security on the gates, for example? I'm thinking of single people that's going at night time, it would be very dark and secluded in there, from a safety point of view.
The access through the pen is part of the red line boundary of the application site. So yes, a condition could be attached to improve the fencing, provide lighting, and improve security. Yes.
Councillor Anderson, any questions?
Quite disappointed amount of actual daylighting that's available within the flat. How much is, there's no view at all of surrounding properties at all from it. There's also very restricted daylighting as well. I find that, as having been a tour of Edinburgh as such, part of the application, it's somewhat different conditions in Perth. But I was disappointed in the layout. I'm sure whether you have comments on questions on the amount of daylighting, if you could come back on that, please.
The amount of daylight reaching the flat would be improved by the amended layout, but you're quite right about view. There'd be a view of a wall less than a metre away, or of the sky, I suppose, from through a skylight. So yeah, there wouldn't be much aspect from any of the windows.
Councillor Stewart.
Could I refer to the document on page 45 where there's photographs of the property? And my question is about noise ingress. I see that there's a multiple air conditioning units attached to the wall. And then if we go to page page 47 of the artist's impression, there's no air conditioning units. I presume the air conditioning units will remain because of the other businesses, and what kind of noise ingress will the people living in the studio flat get? Thank you.
You're correct, Councillor. The air conditioning units would, because they relate to different properties, then the applicants wouldn't be able to remove them. Environmental Health have stated that they're comfortable with the amount of noise that would be generated in terms of residential amenity, but you're quite correct, there would be noise and vibration because they're connected to the actual building structure from these units. So yes, I take your point.
Thank you. No further questions.
I have no other questions either. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart.
I'm happy to proceed, Convener.
And Councillor Anderson.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed on this occasion. This is an unusual one for us to look at. I can see to some extent, looking at the photographs, the attraction, looking at the inside of the property on page 47. So a property like this would attract a young person, a single person, or maybe a couple. So from that point of view, it is attractive. My concerns are the outside. It is, as we've said, background development. There is limited views, and I'm concerned about the length of the walk to it. As I said, whilst I can see the attraction of it from the inside, for a single person as a couple, I have to say on this occasion, I think I'm going to refuse the appeal and confer with the planning officer's decision as his reasons for refusal. So I would refuse the appeal. Councillor Anderson.
Decides convener, agree with you, convener, and your reasons for refusal of appeal.
And Councillor Stewart.
Yes, well, I note that there is a shortage of housing and we need a broad range of properties for a variety of incomes and needs within Perth and Kinross. I am going to agree with the Perth and Kinross officers that go for refusal, which is stated in the documents.
Thank you. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision to refuse.
Thank you, Convener. Just to take you to the original reason for refusal, which was page 33 of your papers. From what I've heard, you're unanimously agreeing with that, with no changes to the narration.
No changes at all.
Okay.
No. Okay, thank you. So, members, will now move to the second item. This is the erection of a dwelling house, land 360 metres southeast of 4 Middlebank Holding in Errol. I believe the applicants are with us. Mr. Ross, could you introduce, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures as usual. The first slide shows the application site, which is accessed off an existing farm road, and you can see the site outlined in red there with the access to the road to the west of it. Next slide, please. So that's the access road to the property. You can see it's a tarmac road. It's not untypical of farm roads in the area. Next slide, please. And you can see the road to the right in the picture is the one that leads to the application site. Next slide, please. And the application site is just beyond the trees, which is also where the applicants have their existing mobile home. Next slide, please. So the access into the site itself, you can see the horse box on the left there. The lands to the right is part of the farmsteading. Next slide, please. And that's the actual site of the proposed house. It's just short of the green area, if you like. The green field is the actual site of the house. So it's proposed to be situated between the trees on the right hand side and the left and those on the left. Next slide, please. That shows it a bit slightly better. You can see the site extends as far as the fence on the left hand side. So the house would sit between the two groups of trees facing south towards the farmland. Next slide, please. That's another view of the same of the site. Next slide, please. And that's looking back towards the main road, which is also land that the applicants own and farm. Next slide, please. Now that's looking from the main road near the golf centre. The site is just to the right of the white polytunnel structure you can see on the left-hand side there in the gap of the trees. You can just make out a bit further along the trees, there's a shape which is the actual the home that the applicants live in at the moment. Next slide, please. That's back to the location shot. Okay, planning permission is sought for the erection of a 1.5-storey house at Middlebank near Errol. The proposed house would have a kitchen, dining room, living room, bedroom, small office and utility rooms on the ground floor, 5 bedrooms and storage on the upper floor. There would also be an integral 2-car garage and single carport. Proposed materials are stone, wet dash render on the walls and a slate roof. The house is central to the applicant's 35-acre holding, which is predominantly grassland, used for sheep grazing and free-range turkey rearing. The applicants currently live in a mobile home in the holding close to the application site. To summarise the applicant's case, as this will be the only house on Oakfield Farm, the design is of a high standard using traditional local reclaimed materials, stone and slate. The design is in keeping with houses in the surrounding area, kept at a 1.5-storey height, with limited dormers to give the farmhouse cottage look. A justification and labour profile report prepared by an independent qualified agricultural consultant with specialist knowledge in turkey and sheep farming enterprises demonstrates the business currently has a total labour requirement of 1.1 standard labour units in order to operate, meeting the council's threshold for a justifiable requirement for a house, which is 1 labour unit. The applicant's actual current stock figures, 500 sheep, are nearly double the stock figure on the justification report, and the turkeys have increased by an additional 50 since the report was done, so the farm meets well above the required units. The living conditions in the mobile home the applicants occupy are cramped for a family of 4, and there's no space to create a farm office or to accommodate a live-in au pair to assist with the childcare at peak times such as lambing and the lead up to Christmas with turkey preparation. Since trading began from Oakfield, the applicants have demonstrated they can withdraw £1,000 a month from the business as a wage. This will increase over time as the majority of construction of the farm has now been done, which will allow for more significant profits year on year. The farming business at this location is financially sound. The case officer notes that it's unfortunate that the council does not have a set timeline for when a new business moves into an established one purely in terms of years. However, a typical timeline in excess of 2 to 3 years is normally seen as a good starting point. It's noted that this is not a new business, as the applicants have been successful in business for 12 years and have now sought a permanent base at Oakfield. Over the last 4 years, the couple have built up a sound reputation for their free-range Kelly Bronze turkeys, which are marketed at the likes of Perth Farmers Market and House of Brewer, showing the business carried out by the applicants is known locally and reputable. The decision to refuse this application is at odds with the Council's and national planning policy, which supports the growth of small and rural businesses. It's disheartening for the young family to remain in their cramped mobile home, trying to run the family enterprise, the farming enterprise, without a farm office. It's clear that the business is financially sound and economically viable, and although having only been in Oakfield for a fairly short duration, the applicants will continue to run this business from strength to strength. To summarise the report of handling, planning permission was granted earlier this year for the siting of a residential caravan on a temporary basis. This application essentially seeks to upgrade that permission to a permanent dwelling. The applicant has also recently secured planning permission for several agricultural sheds, which have since been implemented and are being used in relation to the farm activities. The relevant section of the Housing and the Countryside Guidance is section 3.3, which offers support for new housing linked to economic need, but only if certain criteria can be met and evidenced. The labour justification statement submitted concludes that the existing farm business has a labour unit requirement of 1.1. It's noted that, in addition to the time spent on farming activities, 187 annual hours have been added for admin tasks. If these admin tasks are excluded, I beg your pardon, then the labour requirement will drop below 1. On this basis, the degree of full-time work currently is marginally enough to support one full-time worker. The applicant was asked to provide evidence of business accounts to help demonstrate the financial working of the existing business and how the existing business pays for one full-time worker, which you would normally expect to see if the business is financially sound, economically viable and sustainable. From the evidence which has been presented, the income from the existing business does not allow for a full-time worker's wage, and the amount of drawings made from the business accounts since it started at Oakfield have not been at the level that would represent the pay for a full-time equivalent worker. It's been predicted by the applicant's accountants that if the trajectory of the business continues as it has, then I would hope that the business will support drawings or wages of £24,000 a year, which is more or less a full-time equivalent wage. So this position may change. However, it's noted that the word hope has been used by the accountant and that no time period has been suggested when this point will arrive. On this basis, it has not been demonstrated that the farm is financially sound and economically viable. The Housing and the Countryside Guidance states that where the house is to be associated with an expanded or proposed economic activity, construction of a house will not normally be permitted in advance of the development or expansion of the business. There must be a reasonable certainty that the business will succeed before allowing a new house to be built in the countryside. No representations were received. Material considerations, Policy 19, Housing and the Countryside, and the subordinate guidance are both relevant. Some observations on the proposal. The applicant's business has been in operation for a longer period than required under the Housing and the Countryside Guidance to support the erection of a new house, but not, crucially, at this location. That's the issue which has led to the refusal of planning permission. National Planning Framework 4 supports proposals for new homes in rural areas where the development is suitably scaled, sited, and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area, and where the development is demonstrated to be necessary to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business, and there is essential need for a worker. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Anderson, any questions?
Yes, the acreage involved is small, but the output from their efforts is quite interesting, especially interested in selling, direct selling to the farmers markets plus out with other markets. Sustenance of building a house, you're saying the drawings from the business are quite small to realise, to finance the investment. I think the holding as such would justify a house on the unit, and that's part of the criteria that the planning authorities support.
Yeah, that's correct, Councillor. The evidence submitted hasn't been sufficient to for the case officer to make the to recommend grant of planning permission, and it is perhaps the issue here is that this application is slightly premature, and that maybe in a year or two's time, when the business has expanded as the applicants and the applicants' accountants hope that it will, it would then demonstrate that there's enough to support a full-time worker.
Yeah, because just a question on the house is proposed, that would not be justified with income from farming unit as it stands. On the scale of operation just now, how much would it have to expand as such a farming operation to sustain unit applications, unit the house is applied for?
Yeah, the policy housing in the countryside in support of for a house in support of a rural worker on a worker on a rural business requires the applicant to be able to submit evidence to the to show that the worker is required for the business to be sustained, and that's the issue before us. That the planning permission was refused on the basis that the evidence submitted to date is not sufficient in terms of the income from the farm supporting a rural wage, if you like, a wage.
Perhaps if I come in the other way, it's perhaps not a question of looking as to how much it needs to expand. It's much more the first step. The step is for the applicant to produce information to first of all show that there's enough labour hours to show there's at least one full-time equivalent, and of course you have some information before you on that. But on financial viability, I think the issue before you is whether there's enough income coming in or drawings coming in to actually allow them to justify living there on, as part of that justifies the whole farming operation. I wouldn't want to put a precise figure on it. We all know that farming, the income can be variable and not necessarily hugely profitable, put it that way. But I think the issue is whether there's enough, and that's based on the information before you. So I wouldn't want to flip it onto what do they still require to do. It's more what's in front of you at the moment.
Councillor Stewart.
I would like to get a wee bit of context with this future application. Am I right in thinking when I read that this is a new farm?
Yes, it is. The case officer's report of handling makes the point that planning permission was granted in 2021 for the siting of a residential caravan. So it hasn't been farmed to the extent it is just now on this site for very long.
Thank you. And I believe that this is a parcel of land that was sold in separate lots. Am I right in thinking that?
I believe that's the case. Yes, it's one of a number of parcels.
So this was a parcel of land that's been bought, and a new business has been created from this 35 hectares.
That's correct, Councillor. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. A couple of questions. One leading on from what Mr. Elliott was saying. When we're looking at the financial sustainability, we're not looking at the sustainability to support the house. It's that there's a viable business on that land. Am I correct?
That's correct. It's whether there's enough business generated by the farm to support a living wage. Yes.
Yeah, not the property, just the business. Yeah.
Right.
Now the other question is, Housing the Countryside Guide talks about suitable scale of property, and it's very vague on that part, and I just wonder if you could give a bit more definition to that. It's a difficult one for you, I'm sorry.
It is a difficult one, Councillor, and you're quite correct. It is vague. It talks about scale, as does the new National Planning Framework. That mentions scale as well, but it doesn't suggest any guidance on that. Would be, I guess, a matter for this committee whether they felt whether or not they felt that the size of the house proposed wasn't commensurate with the scale of the operation, and that the farm would support.
Okay, doesn't seem to be any more questions. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson
We could proceed, can proceed.
and Councillor Stewart.
I'd like to proceed.
Yeah, I too can proceed. So, Councillor Anderson, would you like to start off for us on this one?
This application is I would like to see a house being built, this land and the farm sustained. I say we've talked about it being in between. We're not quite at the scale of the size of house that they're promoting, going for just now. But could we possibly defer this application maybe for a year to see movement on that? I think there should be a house that's justifiable in labour hours on the site. But sorry, I have to say possibly myself moving that we defer it for another year and a mobile home, and things will change in the market, their market exposed, and generate more income from that unit or enterprises around that unit. So I would move defer for 1 year.
Can I get a bit of clarification?
Yes,
Councillor, on
Convener.
this one?
Very procedural point is we normally deal with deferrals at the procedure stage, of whether we proceed or not. We're now on to kind of grant refuse, but leaving that aside and moving on to what you're suggesting, I don't think that would be the best option. The cleanest option and the best option is actually, if you consider the information's not yet there, in other words, not yet sufficient, then you would refuse, which would allow the applicants to consider once they have. You don't quite know when the information is going to be available, because of course some of that's financial and they need to sort that out with their accountants. Then it's cleaner to do a refusal, which then allows them to submit another application at a later stage when they are ready to do so. So rather than the deferral, it would be a refusal. Okay.
So back to you, Councillor Anderson. Your thoughts on that?
I suppose when it's written black and white like that, one really has to go with the, unfortunately, the black, which is to refuse at this moment in time and leave it open for the applicants to come back year plus to us. Different circumstances. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. I recognise that this is a new business, and there's also lots of work have gone into this application and the business. I am minded to refuse when we heard earlier that we need to, and I'm minded to refuse because I need to have more evidence that this is a viable business.
Given the majority, I suppose my decision's not there so much now, but I too am concerned on 2 points here. Firstly, we don't have sufficient financial information. If we were looking at this from a lending proposition, we would have to have at least 2 years accounts before us before we went any further, and we don't have that. Certainly the figures seem to indicate it's a viable business and it's a growing business, and I have no doubts about that. But I feel that we've come back to this point too soon, and we need to see that information before us. I note that the mobile home planning expires in April 2024, and we should have at least 2 years figures before that moment in time. So I don't think we're too far off on that side of things. And as I say, certainly the figures we've got seem to show a viable and growing business. I do have another concern, however, and that is this question of the scale of the property. The Housing and Countryside mentions that the property is for an essential farm worker, and a 6-bedroom house for a farm worker, in my mind, is a little bit beyond what you would normally expect. So I have my concerns there about the scale of the property. And that too, I think, is another reason I'm thinking that I would refuse this one. More so on that point, I think, than the financial side of it. But I'm afraid on this occasion, I'm going to have to refuse as well for those 2 points, Mr. Elliott.
Thank you, Convener. Want to address comments particularly to Councillors Anderson and Stewart. I think from what I understand, Convener, you were not as strong on the financial information, but I'm wondering whether you do agree with that. But you were adding in a second ground. Perhaps, yes, you're right. Let's go to page 377, which is the decision notice. And it was refused on one ground, which is about the financial sounding, not being financially sound and economically viable. Now, Councillors Anderson and Stewart agreed with that. Councillor Braun wasn't so sure, but we'll come back on that in a second. But you were also adding in, I think, a second ground about the scale of the proposed dwelling house not being appropriate at the moment to match the scale of the farm. And that's something Councillor Anderson did mention scale initially, Councillor Stewart didn't. So I'm wondering if where we're coming to is want to be clear on your collective grounds of refusal. Now, so I suppose first of all, Councillor Braun, is would you agree with your colleagues on this occasion that about the financial information not being quite there yet?
Yes, I would. That's roughly there, yeah.
Right. So we have that agreed. We also have to think about whether we add in, refer to National Planning Framework 4 policies because of the change in the development plan. Come back on that. But then I'm also looking, you've, Convener, suggested refusal on the scale. I don't know if you've got kind of general wording. Have you got you're thinking of its general wording on that?
I'm coming back to something along the lines that the proposal is contrary to NPF, that's National Planning Framework 4 Policy 17A on rural homes, Perth and Kinross LDP 2 Local Development Plan 2 2019, Policy 19 Housing in the Countryside, and Perth and Kinross's Housing in the Countryside Supplementary Guidance 2020, which is section 3.3. As it can't demonstrate the scale of the proposal house for present scale of the farm, words to that effect I'm thinking of. Not sure if you'd agree with that, but that's roughly, well, that's my thoughts. Obviously,
yes,
depends on my colleagues now.
Yes. So I'm now, I suppose, addressing comments to Councillor Stewart and Councillor Anderson, whether you agree with that, whether to add in a second ground of refusal about the current situation, the current proposal, the scale of the property, whether that at the moment causes you concerns. Now, what I'll say is that if the applicants come back with another application in the future, they can, of course, address that as part of a new proposal. So do you agree with adding that in as a second ground of refusal?
On reflection, I agree with Councillor Braun, and I think it should be a consideration.
I'd probably not agree with that as such. I feel that whatever houses they wish to build, it shouldn't just be restricted on purely output from the farm. It's their discretion to build, which we would allow or not planting permission for. Because I gather that, well, I can't really say this just now, but it isn't visible from around the property. It's not as if it's going to be an eyesore for anyone to look out on. It's pretty well hidden. So why should we impose conditions to restrict the size of the property?
Piece of the same, Convener, usually prefer to have a unanimous grounds or decision here. So we're kind of got a split decision on this. I mean, it can be narrated as a split decision if you so wish.
I'd just like to have a moment to thank you. Thank you, Convener. I was just reviewing some of the housing in the countryside. I am still minded to go along with the addition, with my adding in additional scale.
Yes. Right. Okay. So really, although all three are refusing, you're doing so for different grounds. Two wish to refuse for the second ground of the financial information and the second ground of scale. And Councillor Anderson didn't want to add that, so I've got that narrated. One thing to check is on ground one. I'll make a suggestion just for speed here, but I think you would also be adding in technical reference to NPF 4 policy 1785 rural homes. That's the equivalent policy in NPF 4. So you'll be refusing on that as well. I think I've got that. I've got that now. Yes, I've got that. Yes. So just to recap, Councillors Braun and Councillor Stewart refuse on the basis of not being financially and economically viable, adding in some changes to reference to NPF 4 as well. And you're also adding in the second ground of refusal referring to the scale. And Councillor Anderson is only on the first ground. Okay. Yep.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry it's not the answer you wanted, but the door is far from closed. I think you'd agree. Okay. Thank you. So we now move on to item 3, which is a residential development in principle, land 100 metres northwest of Easter Drummer 30 farm in Spitalfield. Mr. Burton.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the photographs, site photos first. So the site is, as you can see, is the corner of a field on the north side of the Old Military Road, the A984, in between the farmhouse, which is on the right, and a cottage on the left. You can see that there's a significant road frontage along there, and it stretches back into the field behind. Next slide, please. So that's looking at the farmhouse, Easter Drummatherry farmhouse. So the application site, part of the application site is just beyond the hedge there. Next slide, please. And looking along the road, the application site is on the far side of the hedge. You can see the bushes there are the corner of the farmhouse, and beyond that is the application site. You can see in the distance along that side of the road the next cottage. So the application site is between the bushes on the right hand side there and the cottage further down the road. Next slide, please. And that's looking across the hedge that forms a boundary to the site into the field to the north. Next slide, please. That's standing at the very corner of the site, looking along the whole length of the site towards the faraway cottage, and you can see the field, agricultural field stretching to the north there. Next slide, please. And looking, that's the farmhouse on the right hand side, so the fence running up to the right hand side of the picture is the boundary between the farmhouse grounds and the application site, which is part of the field. As you can see the field is very open at the moment. Next slide, please. And again, that's just looking from the very corner of the site, looking the whole length of the site where the two houses are proposed. Next slide, please. And looking from the hedge at the corner of the site, the whole length of the field, looking away from the road. Next slide, please. So planning permission is sought for the erection of 2 detached houses in an open field between Easter Drummatherry farmhouse and Easter Drummatherry cottage. One of the houses, to summarise the applicant's case, one of the houses is proposed for the son of the farmer who works in the farm and will, it is planned, to take over the management of the farm when his father retires. With regards to the housing in the countryside policy, While the proposal may not fit perfectly into any of the categories, the most favourable opportunity presented is Category 2 infill sites. A site on the other side of Dromerthy farmhouse was considered between the farmhouse and another cottage, but that site is known to flood. Because of the size of the application site, 2 houses are proposed. To summarise the report of handling, the relevant development policies are Policy 1, placemaking, Policy 19, housing and the countryside, Policy 50, prime agricultural land, Policy 27A, listed buildings, and Policy 52, new development and flooding. Policy 1, placemaking requires all development to contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment development. The design, density and siting of development should respect the character and amenity of the place. The proposal fails to respond positively to local features, including the open farmland setting and the setting of the listed building. The proposal would have a detrimental impact on the dispersed building pattern of individual houses and cottages and the wider landscape character of the area, so it does not satisfy the requirements of Policy 1A and 1B placemaking. Policy 19, housing in the countryside, applies. The applicant's supporting statements highlights 3 existing buildings, Easter Dromerthy Cottage, Easter Dromerthy Farm and Silver King Cottage, which it defines as a group to comply with Category 1 building groups. It's considered that the buildings are too dispersed to appear as a group, but are more individual buildings in an open farmland setting. In respect of Category 2 infill sites, the application site is in a regular shape, measuring 6,880 square metres. The proposal is to split the elongated site into 2 substantial plots. The plots are not comparable in size to the neighbouring plots and will not have a similar size of road frontage. The proposal has been manufactured to fit the full extent of the farmland between Easter Dromerthy Cottage and Easter Dromerthy Farm, more than 150 metres apart, and the size of the plots does not respect the character of the area and are not sympathetic to the neighbouring buildings. The proposal therefore doesn't satisfy the requirements of Category 2 infill sites. It would lead to the creation of ribbon development on the north side of the Old Military Road. The housing in the countryside supplementary guidance clearly states ribbon development will not be supported. The supporting statement highlights the reason for the application is to provide a house for the son of the applicant who runs the farm. No supporting evidence has been submitted to consider the proposal for a new house or 2 houses to support an existing business under Category 3. Under this category, applications in principle are not acceptable, as detailed plans and full information are essential to making an informed assessment. In respect of Policy 50, prime agricultural land, the application site is prime agricultural land. This policy states that small-scale development, including housing, may be acceptable provided it's compatible with all other aspects of the policy framework of the plan. The proposal doesn't satisfy Policy 50 as it's not compatible with the policy framework of the plan by virtue of not satisfying Policy 1, placemaking, and Policy 19, housing in the countryside. An objection in principle due to flood risk has been received from Flooding Development Control. The site is within the approximate events of a 200-year fluvial flood event from the River Tay. As such, the applicant needs to provide a full flood risk assessment to determine the exact 200-year plus climate change floodwater levels. The proposal does not satisfy Policy 52, new development and flooding. Easter Dromerthy farmhouse is listed, Category C. It's particularly prominent in the existing open flat farmland setting. The west gable is a significant landscape feature on the approach from the west along a straight section of the Old Military Road. Historic mapping shows a steading range to the northeast of the farmhouse, but it has remained undeveloped to the east or west, maintaining a clear visual and historic relationship to the wider agricultural landscape. A residential development in the location proposed would detract from this historic landscape context, intruding on the key view of the farmhouse from the west. As such, the proposal is likely to have a significant adverse impact on the setting of the listed building, and so does not satisfy Policy 27A, listed buildings. There were no representations received to the application. Material considerations, as stated in the handling report, Policies 1A and 1B, 19, 27A, 50 and 52 are relevant. Observations on the proposal. The application site is identified as being within an area at risk of flooding, albeit at the lowest risk category. Because of the continuing impacts of climate change, SEPA regularly updates its risk categories. So if the committee are minded to grant permission, a flood risk assessment would need to be carried out before planning permission could be granted. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Stewart, any questions?
Thank you, Convener. Is there any guidance around infill with regards to the scale?
In terms of the policy housing in the countryside, the infill would require to be of a commensurate scale. If you look at the gap between East Dromarthy, the actual farmhouse, and the cottage to the east, you could see there could be an argument for a single house there with a plot to the similar scale as the two adjacent. The two plots proposed here would be significantly larger than the plots of the houses to the west and the east, to the three plots shown on the drawing there. So the scale as an infill site is, I would say, large for two houses.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Sympathetic to the farmer wishing his son to reside on the land farm, stay next to his parents directly, but some land on the farm could be utilised for the son's house. I just wondered, it's difficult now, no planning officer as such, to say, had he discussed other areas on the farm where it might have been suitable to build a house for the son. Infill we see in front of us now it's close to flooding problems, but it's one of these marginal decisions between number of houses and groupings. I have my concerns. The size of the plots you're saying are quite large. What areas are involved in each plot, and plots 1 and 2? What sizes are involved? Acreages or what hectareages we're talking about?
To be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the acreage would be. The two cottages, the Dromarthy Cottage and East Dromarthy Farm, are 150 metres apart, which means that as frontages, the frontage of each site would be significant. It would be larger than the frontages of the adjacent houses. There is information on the sites. I think 6,880 square metres is the entire plot size, which is very large for two houses. In a suburban setting, you can suggest something like 400 square metres is a sufficient size for a detached house. So you can take from that. Obviously, this isn't a suburban setting. This is a countryside setting, so we're talking larger, but still, it's quite a significant scale just for the number of houses proposed.
Yeah, just looking at acres you're talking about, it was 160 yards along the front, was it? You said about 160 meters. Okay, so 80 meters frontage per plot, roughly, and depth. If you split that, you probably that again, so 6,400 square meters, which is quite large. Okay, thank you very much.
I have no questions on this one, I think. So, Councillor Stewart, yes, come.
Sorry, Convener, I'd like to ask a further question. I'm aware that SEPA often change their flood areas. Has there been any changes since the report came out?
Not as I'm aware of, Councillor. I looked at the current flooding information from SEPA when I was preparing this report just last week, and it identified the site as low risk but possibility of flooding. In recent years, SEPA have started to update their flood risk maps much more regularly because of climate change, because they found it necessary to do so. And the upgrading generally is a worsening situation. So I wouldn't expect the site to become less susceptible to flooding over time, but it could potentially become more susceptible to flooding.
Thank you. No further questions.
Okay, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart.
Proceed.
And Councillor Anderson.
Proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed on this one, as we are. I think, having read the paperwork and heard from Mr. Burton, I think we're quite clear that this is really out with the policy. It's too, the properties are too far apart. It's not a group. It is quite clearly out with our policy on policy 19 for building in the countryside. That said, I think there's possibly another route through. I'm not going to lead anybody through on that, but my thoughts are that there are possibilities here with another means of using policy 19 for the fact that this is the farmer's son who works the farm and would be classed as an essential worker. That's a clue to where you should go on this, I think. But I would caution here the flooding. It is obvious there is concerns from SEPA regarding flooding, and whilst there may be another route through to build here, I think that serious thought should be given to concerns over potential flooding of the area. So as it stands at the moment, given that it's out with current policy and the application is put forward on that way, I'm going to concur with the planning officer and refuse. My only thoughts would be perhaps to drop policy 3, which relates to the house next door, East of Drummurthy, being a listed building, grade C listed. I don't agree that any houses built there would be detrimental to it. It is, after all, a house. It's not a historic monument as such. So I would ask a reason for refusal. Reason for refusal, hard to say. Number 3 will be dropped. But other than that, I concur with what the planning officer said. So I'm refusing the application, the appeal. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. Yep. Well, we understand the needs of the business and the family. I am minded to refuse this application. On policy 19 of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2, I'm concerned about houses being built on an area of possible flooding, pointed out by the officers in point 5. It doesn't satisfy policy 52. I do not have a problem with the listed building, and I'd keep that in place. Other than that, I'd refuse this application.
Councillor Anderson.
I would agree with all comments passed in refusing this application in front of us. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, could I just ask you a point on number 3? Where do you stand on reason for refusal number 3, which is the listed building?
I would agree with my co-conspirator on the table here, Councillor Brown-John.
So that's where we stand at the moment, Councillor Elliott. Sorry, Mr. Elliott. I promoted you there. I think given the majority, I'm happy for it to stay in. Then obviously, if that's my colleague's decision, so we'll keep number 3 in.
That would be perhaps the simplest way of dealing with it, if you're happy with that on reflection. Now, I think my question is whether you wish to change the term. Looking at page 45, 486, unanimous decision to refuse. The question is whether you wish to change the terms of the refusal. Of course, you do have to take into account MPF 4.
That's correct. So if we're looking at the reasons for refusal number 1, it does mention policy 1A and 1B. I think we should be more precise. 1B, I think, is the appropriate one for it. I think we should sorry, and NPF policy 17, I think, which is to do with rural homes.
Just to think, sorry, what I've got to Camille at the moment is ground refusal number one.
Number one.
You are amending policy 1A and 1B to become 1BB.
B, that's right.
I think your policy 17 of NPF4 would come in the next
paragraph. Yep.
So it would be.
And I think we could tidy that up a little bit.
Yes, there's a bit of that. I mean, we can do that for you.
Okay,
but
fine.
I think what you're doing is not just refusing contrary to policy 19 of the LDP to and the supplementary guidance, but also adding in NPF4 policy 17, which is rural homes. Ground three,
I think we need to mention, since we're now leaving it all in, NPF4 policy 7A, which was historic buildings and places, which relates to east of Number 30.
Okay.
And
yes.
And if we go on to round 4, we need to mention, I think, NPF4 5B, policy 5B, which is to do with soils. And then on the last one, which is number 5, we need to mention NPF4 policy 22, which is to do with flooding.
Floods, risk and water management, I think, yes. And if you're content members, there'll need to be some sort of grammatical tidying up of that as well. So we will deal with that. But essentially you are refusing unanimously on similar grounds to the planning officer. And what you're doing is adding in number 1 is 1BB, and then in the others you're adding in the requisite reference to NPF4.
And then National Plan Framework, that's it, correct.
Okay.
Yep, correct. So I'm afraid there's a refusal again, I'm afraid, sorry. So this now brings us to number 4.4, which is the erection of a dwelling house laying 80 metres northwest of Spoutwells Farm at McClure. Mr. Burton, if you can introduce that, I believe the applicants are with us as well.
Thank you, Chair. Take you through the pictures. The first slide shows the application site. It's on the north corner, north side of the B947. At the corner, you can see on the south side the steading, which is referred to in the applicant's submission. As you can see, the site is on the corner of a field, and it takes in some adjacent some of the adjacent tree belt. Next slide, please. So looking at the site from below, the application site is on the left. This is taken from just about the corner of the site. You can see on the right-hand side, on the other side of the road, the nearby farm buildings. You can also see the site rises from the road, and where the house is proposed to sit would be above the level of the road. Next slide, please. Looking at it further along, you can see the application site is the cleared area, part of the cleared area. You can see a fence line part of the way through that field, the area to the back, which approximately shows the application site boundary. Next slide, please. Looking into the site, some of the tree belt to the left there forms part of the site, but most of the site is the open area directly in front there of the fence. You can see a slightly different coloured area to the front of the field, which I understand is where a cottage used to stand. Next slide, please. And looking into the site, as you get closer to the farmhouse, you can see it slopes downwards to the road fairly steeply. Next slide, please. Standing adjacent to the fence, looking at the site in its entirety, you can see it's undulating. The site of what I take to be the site of the former cottage, is directly in front of the camera there. You can see a bit of rubble, what looks like rubble anyway, on the field. There's not much to show that the cottage did stand there before. Next slide, please. And we're back to the original slide. So permission is sought for the erection of a two-storey detached house on open ground in a field near Spoutwell's Farm, Meikler. The house would have a living room, kitchen, dining room, snug bedroom, utility room, plant room and garage on the ground floor, and 3 further bedrooms and a study on the upper floor. The proposed finish would be stone, timber cladding and grey slate. It would occupy a raised site in the corner of a field on the opposite side of the road from the Spoutwell Farm buildings. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicants have bought the site with a view to building a house for their retiral. There have been 2 previous consents for a house at the appeal site, the most recent of which, in 2007, could be said to remain extant because the house that was in sight was demolished following the grant of planning permission, constituting a site start. While the applicant could gather evidence to show that the 2007 consent was implemented and submit a certificate of lawfulness, it's felt that the description of events contained in the appeal statement is sufficient for a reasonable person to take the view that the consent remains. If the committee accepts that, this application could be seen as an amendment to that consent. The application site formerly contained a cottage, which has since been demolished, although traces remain on site, albeit below ground level. As such, the proposal also complies with the Council's housing and the countryside guidance, which allows for a replacement house and the redevelopment of brownfield land. To summarise the report of handling, detailed planning permission was granted on the site in 2007 for the erection of a dwelling house, replacing an existing cottage which was on site. That application was later amended slightly in 2012 via a further detailed planning application. From the 2012 file, it appears that the cottage was removed before that application was determined. However, there is limited evidence on either file which indicates that either permission had formally commenced. It's noted that the applicant has not presented an argument in relation to this. In the absence of a certificate of lawfulness to confirm the lawfulness of either the 2007 or the 2012 permission, they are considered to have fallen and to have expired. The previous detailed planning applications were approved on the basis of the replacement of an existing cottage. The site has now been essentially cleared with little evidence of the former cottage, with vegetation now covering the remains. It's therefore difficult to make an argument that this proposal should be considered as the replacement of an existing former cottage or the redevelopment of a rural brownfield site, as the condition of the site does not present itself as having a significant degree of environmental harm, or even presenting as a site of dereliction. A more appropriate assessment approach would be to assess it under the building group section of Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside. This offers support for new dwellings which extend an existing building group into a readily definable site, providing the new dwelling would respect the character, scale and form of the existing building group and would be integrated into the layout and building pattern. On the north side of the road, there are no existing properties. To the south, there's one steading building and a former farmhouse, which is not occupied. There is not, therefore, an existing building group in situ. There is also a distinct separation between the proposed house and the 2 existing buildings, which does not result in a close-knit relationship and which would not respect the pattern of development in the area. It would also inevitably create the opportunity for further development by creating infill opportunities between the buildings. The proposal, therefore, does not comply with Policy 19. Policy 17 of the new National Planning Framework 4 relates to rural homes and looks to encourage, promote and facilitate the delivery of more high-quality, affordable and sustainable rural homes in the right location. Part 8 of that policy supports proposals to replace a former dwelling house. As that policy simply requires there to have been a dwelling present, the proposal would accord with the principle of that policy. However, that policy in its preamble states that in addition to complying with the specific criteria listed, all development proposals for new homes in rural areas will only be supported where the development is suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area. In this case, it's considered that as the site's boundaries are very open and the proposed development does not have a good existing landscape setting or a naturally contained residential curtilage, the proposal fails to accord with this policy also. No representations were received. Material considerations, policies 1A and 1B and 19 of the local development plan and policy 17 of National Planning Framework 4 are relevant. Some observations on the proposal. The applicant's suggestion that permission should be granted here because the consent granted in 2007 remains in force is not relevant to the committee's consideration of this application. The applicant has the option of submitting an application for a certificate of lawfulness if he considers that either of the previous applications were commenced and as a result are extant. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Am I right in thinking, Mr. Burton, that the cottage that sat in that site, the proposal was to not build on top of that footprint, but further north? Am I correct?
That's correct, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Just wonder, has the Roads Authority made any comments of access to the proposed site?
There were no objections from Roads, Councillor.
It seems quite close to the main road, that bend coming around the bend from the left to right. It's almost very dangerous. There's a side exit from the site compared to the farm across the road over there. No much more visible line, but there hasn't been, the roads have made no unfavourable comments.
I'm just checking the handling report, Councillor, and what it says is Transportation and Development have commented on the proposal in terms of access and parking related issues and have no objections subject to conditions and informative notes being attached.
Just a bit of clarification, Mr. Burton. The current house policy 19 that we have, this property or the proposal wouldn't comply because it's not a building group. It's not in a defined space, and it's not brownfield because there's no remedial work to be done, no remedial contamination as such, and there's not a replacement building because there's no building to replace. Is that effectively what we're saying?
That's correct. That's what the report of handling states, Councillor. You're quite correct. The previous consent in 2007 was for a replacement building. It was under a different local plan, of course, a different development plan, but the building which this building was, the proposed house was to replace, was still on site, and that there's no building on site now, so there's no. It falls on that point, in that there's no replacement building. There's no building there to replace, and you're correct also that it also doesn't meet the terms of the policy in that the brownfield land on site does not require remediation to the extent that would allow for a new building.
So everything's really hinges on the demolition of this cottage and whether extent permission exists from 2007. Am I right?
That is what the appellant, the applicant has based a lot of the case on. Just to take you through the legal aspect of this, Section 27 of the Planning Act says that planning permission is taken to have been implemented when a material operation required for the development has been carried out. And a material operation can include any works of construction, demolition, digging foundations, laying out or constructing a road, or a material change of use in the use of the land. So the 2007 consent could perhaps be said to be kept alive by the works of the demolition of the cottage, but that's not what's before this committee. That requires evidence to be submitted in terms of an application for a certificate of lawfulness, which is a separate application and a separate process. The applicants can gather whatever evidence they have about the demolition, about the timescale, and present that to the council under the aegis of an application for a certificate of lawfulness. And by that means, it's open to them to show that the 2007 consent still remains and can be and can be implemented. But that has no bearing on this application, which is for which is a new application for a house.
Fine, that's me. And no other questions from anyone? No. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart?
Proceed.
And Councillor Anderson?
Proceed.
I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Stewart, if you could start on this one.
Thank you, convener. Quite a complex application before us today. And just carrying on from what Mr. Burton was saying earlier, that this is a new application, so I am minded to refuse. And I agree with the Perth and Kinross officer's report, the three reasons, one being the policy, the LDP2, policy 19. Point 2, contrary to policy 17 of the National Planning Framework 4, and point 3, proposal is contrary to policy 1A of the Local Development Plan 2.
Councillor Anderson?
I'd agree with my fellow councillor's recommendation to refuse. I agree with the decision of the planning officers.
This is, as you say, this is a tricky one, and it is all hinges on the demolition of the original cottage on site. The application as it stands doesn't comply with our policies, and therefore it needs to be refused. And I would agree with your decisions there. But I'd say the applicants, you need to get or pursue a certificate of lawful use or development, because once you have that, that will open doors again for you to proceed. That's the necessary route to proceed with, to certify when that cottage was demolished. But it all hinges on that, because as it stands at the moment, as we've discussed, the application doesn't fit our current policies, but did fit the policies at that time. And if they can prove when the cottage was demolished, we effectively have an extant permission to proceed. So that is your route. So as it stands at the moment, I have to agree with my colleagues to refuse. But I think, as I said to the couple, the door is wide open for you if you can get that certificate of lawful use or development. So I'll leave that with you yourselves. But as it stands at the moment, we must refuse it. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision again.
Yes, that's what I have, convener. Looking at page 553, 554, is you are refusing in line with the appointed officer with no changes suggested.
So, members, we now move on to number 4.5, which is the erection of 4 dwelling houses and 3 garages, lying 50 metres southeast of Creighton Gardens in Cleash. Mr. Burton, if you'd introduce, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures. First of all, setting the scene, the application site is running south of the B9097. You can see it's quite a significant site. The part of the site which is kind of grey coloured, that's a working yard at the moment. There was a vehicle on site moving gravel about when I was out on site. To the left of the road, that's the tracks running through the site, there's a shed as well. The greener part of the site presents certainly from as you'll see in the pictures, as just an overgrown part of land. Next slide, please. So that's looking into the site. You can see the driveway of the adjacent house, which is one of the 5 buildings on the road there. You're looking at the gable of the barn that's on site, the barn that's on site. To the left of that is the yard, which is being worked by a digger, I seem to recall. Next slide, please. Looking further along the road, the trees, the mature trees along the frontage, they define the edge of the site to the road. Next slide, please. And looking down towards the barn, you can see the area of hard standing to the left of the barn, which is at a yard use. It was originally connected to the local quarry, and it was used for storing gravel and moving gravel. Next slide, please. This is looking at the part of the site which isn't hard standing. You can see where the trees end is the edge of the site towards the road, but the site itself extends where the fences are. You can see the fence line further on. That delineates part of the site which is overgrown as opposed to a yard. Next slide, please. And that's looking further, looking at standing on the side of the road. The fence, you can see the fence running away from the road next to the trees, and then takes a left. That all encloses the site as it moves away from the road, if you like. Two houses are proposed on the hard standing area part of the site, and a further two houses are proposed on the site, on the land you can see, the greener land you can see directly in front of the photograph there, which is the sort of overgrown parcel of land. Next slide, please. And that's looking down towards the edge of the site and the open field beyond. Next slide, please. That gives you a clearer idea of the extent of the non-hard standing part of the site. It's pretty much the whole of that area enclosed by the fence in front. So there's an intervening area of field and then the site beyond that. Next slide, please. Okay, so planning permission is sought for the erection of 4 detached houses on a site adjacent to a group of 5 single-storey houses to the north of Cleash. 3 of the houses would be bungalows, each with 4 bedrooms, kitchen, lounge and utility, and 1 would have accommodation over 2 levels, with a kitchen, dining room, lounge, office, utility, pantry and bedroom on the ground floor, and 3 bedrooms, a laundry room and a games room on the upper floor. All would be finished in render, timber cladding and stone with slate roofs. The 3 bungalows would have separate garages, and the 2-storey house would have an integral garage. Part of the site, the part closest to the road, is in use for the storage of gravel. An application for 5 houses on the same site was refused in 2021. To summarise the applicant's case, the site is a storage building and an area of hard standing. It was previously used for the storage of gravel and materials associated with the Craigton gravel quarry. Part of it is overgrown, and part continues to be used for the storage of materials. The proposed layout and scale of the houses would complement the existing building group without giving rise to any issues of a residential amenity. The proposal would therefore comply with Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside. Part of the site has historically been used for the storage of gravel, so as brownfield, further complying with the policy. The Council's public transport unit raised issues about access for septic tank vehicles and footpath and bus boarding points. These have been addressed in the additional information included in the appeal statement. SEPA have raised concerns about the calculations used to demonstrate phosphorus levels. The calculations submitted with the application are the same as those submitted for the most recent unsuccessful planning application. Had this issue been brought to the applicant's attention, revised calculations would have been submitted. They are now included in the appeal documentation. It's noted that the largest house has a games room upstairs, which is not intended for use as a bedroom. The applicants would be happy to have a condition attached restricting the number of bedrooms in the property. The Council Structures and Flooding team have asked for the flood risk assessment to be amended to consider a culvert to the northwest of the site. The appellant would welcome a condition to provide further flood risk modelling to cover SEPA's concerns. To summarise the report of handling, the proposal falls to be principally considered against Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, and the associated guidance. The building group's category of the guide states that consent may be granted for houses which extend an existing group into a definable site formed by existing topography, roads, or well-established existing landscape features. The application site lies on the edge of the existing building group, visually separated by a mature tree belt. It's also within an area of open land which lacks sufficient established boundary treatment to the south and east to provide adequate containment to the proposed new development. As such, it's considered that the proposal would not expand the site into a readily definable site as required in the Housing and the Countryside Guidance. The previous refusal made it clear that the site did not represent an extension of the building group into a definable site. However, this revised application, by reducing the number of units, still proposes development on the same site footprint, and the proposal remains contrary to Policy 19. The applicant claims that part of the site is brownfield and that developing it would lead to an environmental improvement. The northern part of the site is still in use for storage, however, so it cannot be classified as derelict and brownfield. Category 6 of the Housing and the Countryside Guidance allows for redevelopment of a derelict site if it is so badly contaminated that it requires remediation, and that development is the only means of improving it. It has not been demonstrated that this is the case here, even if the whole site were to be covered by the storage use. The design and layout of the proposed development also does not accord with the prevailing design and pattern of development within the existing group. All of the existing houses are single-storey and have been developed along the roadside with no tandem or backland development. The proposal has reduced the scale of 3 of the units from the 2021 scheme, but there remains a large-scale 8.5 metre high dwelling to the rear of the site, which results in a layout that fails to respect the established layout and building pattern of the group. This issue was identified as part of the refusal of the previous application and has not been fully addressed in this revised submission. Transfer planning have queried some elements of the layout, including the ability of the site to accommodate a septic tank delivery vehicle, and have sought a swept path to demonstrate this. They've also sought clarity on the layout and whether footways are proposed to be installed, as no key has been provided. The plans also show paths out to the public road network and along the B9097, but it's unclear whether these would be linking to a footway along the 9097. There are concerns about these footpaths being provided directly onto that road, and clarity is required. The site is located within Lochleven catchment area, where foul development from new developments must demonstrate at least 125% betterment. The applicant has submitted drainage calculations, which SEPA have reviewed, and SEPA disagrees with the calculations. The plans show a proposal for 3 4-bedroom houses. This would give 3 times 6 PE, population equivalent properties. One of the houses has a large games room on the same floor as the bedrooms, and SEPA considers that this should be considered as a potential bedroom, in line with Perth and Kinross Council guidance. Furthermore, the mitigation calculations show 5 properties and are a replication of the previous application. The calculations require to be updated with the correct number of houses and the correct number of bedrooms for each property. The calculations therefore require to be amended. The flood risk assessment submitted does not consider the culvert of the Colonel Burn to the northwest of the site, and the Council's flooding team indicate that there's a possibility of the application site flooding, depending on the volume of water coming down the Colonel Burn towards the culvert. Flood risk modelling for this culvert requires to be provided, as it has not been suitably addressed by the submitted flood risk assessment. There are still doubts as to the suitability of the site from a flooding perspective. Representations, Cleash and Blair Adam Community Council support the proposal and suggest that if it's built, the Council should take measures to control traffic speed on the B9097. Material considerations, policies 1A and 1B, 19, 46B and 52 are relevant. Some observations on the proposal. The proposal is the same site as that refused in 2021, although the number of houses proposed is reduced by 1. Some of the information provided in support of this appeal, the phosphorus calculations and the roads information, were not before the case officer, so have not been assessed by SEPA or the Council's Roads and Transportation Services. The flood risk assessment submitted is similarly incomplete. If the committee feels that the proposal might be in accordance with Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, this new information would need to be properly assessed and approved prior to making a decision. The applicant has proposed a condition restricting the use of one of the upstairs rooms in the large house to a games room, not a bedroom. Planning permission would not be required to use this room, or indeed the other upstairs room shown as a laundry room as a bedroom, so a condition restricting this charge would neither be appropriate nor enforceable. this change, I beg your pardon, would neither be appropriate nor enforceable. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bird. You've answered one of my questions already just at the end there. So the other one I was going to ask is the site itself. From what you were saying, it's still active. It's not a derelict site as such.
It was active on the day I visited. Certainly, there was a digger on site moving gravel around. Yes.
Councillor Anderson, no questions.
You said it's an active site, but what conditions if it shuts down? You know, whatever the moving gravel could just a temporary measure. So it could be classed possibly as a brownfield site. Is that how long would it have to shut down to be in that context?
Yeah, that's correct. So the site would have to be closed and cleared, not necessarily buildings, but of materials such as the gravel that's on site for it to be derelict. If the applicants were then to seek a proposal permission on the basis of it being brownfield land that required some contamination treatment, then that information on the contamination present and how that should be, and what damage is doing and how that should be treated would be required as part of the supporting information with the application.
Because on the basis that it's possibly the person that operates the site is possibly the person who may be selling the site. Could the application be considered, possibly in favour of it, if the operation were to cease by the owner saying that's the end of operations on the site, I wish to redevelop the site? At present, we're saying no, because it's an operating site, isn't it?
Because it's currently an operating site, it's not derelict land. So that part of the housing and the countryside guidance would not apply. If the applicant or if the operator were to stop using it and the site were to be cleared, then it could be classified as brownfield land, and it could be a consideration under the terms of the policy. However, that policy does require the applicant to submit details of contamination on site, how that should be remediated, and the harm the contamination is causing. The policy requires the contamination to be harmful to the extent that the only way of dealing with it would be to develop it for another use.
At present, we have no notice of contamination on the site, or have not imposed any condition that it has to be cleared of any contamination before we can look at the application.
That's not part of the information that's before us, Councillor. We don't have any information on any potential ground contamination.
No, where before us is the appeals to build houses on that location. So,
if I come in, Mr. Barton was explaining the supplementary guidance on housing, countryside and catchy sites development of rural brownfield land and what the requirements are. Perhaps the easiest is to look at what's before you, and my understanding is the applicant is not arguing brownfield land at this stage. What's before you is they're looking at an extension to a building group, so it's that category that's before you today, not the brownfield land category, because that does require much more information that isn't before you.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Mr. Barnett, I appreciate that you probably didn't get full access to site when there was operating machinery in the area. I was thinking about the flooding and looking at the map in front of us, where we see the Kernel Burn in the letter C. I believe that there's, I couldn't make out what's the burn and what is a field drain or a culvert, but there's certainly at the letter C, there's two waterways converge there. Is that where SEPA were maybe having concerns about possible material getting lodged and causing flooding.
Yeah, it's the culvert of the Colonel Burn to the northwest of the site. So that would be, I must admit, I don't know precisely what it is, Councillor, but I assume that you're correct, and it's not far from the sea of Colonel there. That would be to the west rather than the northwest. So it's possible that it's further north than that, perhaps close to the house that exists just below the letters 9097. But I don't have that information, so it's speculation. But it is noted that the flood risk assessment submitted doesn't consider that culvert, and that's the issue. The flood risk modelling for the culvert is asked for by the council's flood risk experts. So, and then that would need to be examined by SEPA once it's submitted.
Thank you. That was a difficult question, and review the circumstances. Could I ask a further question? When we are when we're looking at the plans, there was a note about the possibility of if septic tanks were needing emptied, and the possibility of a lorry or the tanker not being able to get access to the tanks. I see that there is sort of a hammerhead within the site, but I'm presuming as long as there wasn't additional cars in the hammerhead, the lorry would be able to turn. Was that discussed at all with the developers?
The council's transportation people are looking for a swept path analysis. Now, it's not clear from the papers whether it's a swept path analysis for the entrance to the road, the internal road to the site. I'm looking at page 729, which shows the site plan, and there's obviously a couple of corners. Well, there are three corners. There's the corner where at the entrance to the site, the road that would lead between the four houses. There's a corner within the site, halfway through it, and then there's the hammerhead that you refer to, which has got two parking spaces on the northern side and access to what looks to be a garage on the southern side. And in fact, it looks to me as if it's an access to a septic tank. So what the handling report says is that there isn't evidence that the trucks, the size of vehicles required to service the septic tanks would be able to access them. Now, I would imagine that you're correct, and it's the hammerhead at the very end of the site that's the issue. But in any case, that information wasn't before the case officer, hasn't been seen by the case officer's colleagues in roads and transportation. So that information would need to be properly submitted and assessed before any consent could be granted.
Thank you. That was obviously, again, another difficult question when you're just working from plans, so I appreciate it. Thank you. No further questions, convener.
Thank you, members. So I have no further questions either. So if I may then, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson?
We can proceed.
And Councillor Stewart?
Proceed.
And I too am able to proceed, I think, on this one. So if we can move to the debate side, Councillor Anderson, your thoughts, please.
My thoughts are to not vote to accept the application, supporting the planning officer's refusal of development of the site. It's kind of in breach of the housing group, and we agreed that it's part of a housing group. There are drainage problems on the site. It's nice to see the local community council supporting development in the area, but possibly not this one at this stage anyway. So I would so I'm moving, coinciding with the planning officer's report, to refuse, and we would continue that feeling.
Thank you, Councillor. I too, I feel, on this occasion, I'm going to refuse the appeal. The previous application was refused because of it wasn't compliant as a group. Dropping one house out, I think, hasn't changed that. It still doesn't meet the requirements for a building group. The policy does actually mention that new housing will respect the character, scale and form of the existing group and will be integrated into the existing layout and building pattern, and I don't think that is the case here. The officer has intimated that two houses on the roadside, single story, would be a possible way forward. Again, that hasn't been taken on board. There are obviously other considerations, reasons for refusal. It's a hard thing to say sometimes. Certainly on matters of flooding and phosphorus calculations, and obviously, as we've heard, we cannot condition the use of rooms in the property. So I think those calculations are still out. So as the refusals stand, I will concur with the officer, the planning officer, and agree to refuse the appeal on the reasons for refusal as written in this report of handling. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. We are obviously under pressure and we require further housing. However, I don't think this meets what is stated in the Perth and Kinross LDP2. So I am minded to refuse this paper before us today. Looking at the LDP2, the policy 19, housing in the countryside, I've got concerns about building groups. It wouldn't reflect the very small hamlet. We're getting a cluster of houses here, which doesn't reflect the other houses nearby. It's spreading, it's not an infill site, it's spreading out into the countryside, heading south. I agree with the policy 1A and 1B, and bear with me, I've got concerns about the flooding around the Colonel Burn and the joining field drain or culvert as well. I think there needs to be work done there. There's holes around the policy 46B, Lochleven catchment area, with looking at collection of chemicals. So I would be refusing.
I think we have a unanimous decision here. I think the concern is possibly my colleagues is the two other plots, 3 and 4. So I'm just wondering whether we need to add another condition regarding those, but and also take into account NPF 4. I'm not sure we need to discuss.
You mean add another ground of refusal?
Another ground for refusal, which is to do
on the
with
basis of NPF.
NPF 4 policy 17, which is to do with rural houses and the layout and location of plots 3 and 4, which I think is the concern. They are not in keeping with the character of the area. So I'm not sure my colleagues will agree with that, but I think that's worth considering.
You know, just to kind of recap before bringing in the other councillors, is that I'm looking at page 713, 714, 5 grounds of refusal. You've agreed with those 5 grounds of refusal, and my understanding is kind of reflecting grounds 1 and 2 is you're adding in an additional grounded refusal proposal contrary to MPF4 policy 17, rural homes, as a layout and location of plots 3 and 4 are not in keeping with the character of the area. As I say, that's kind of not replicating grounds 1 and 2, but it's updating it in line with MPF4. So I'm looking at Councillor Stewart and Anderson as to whether you agree with that.
I'd like to thank the convener for bringing that point, and I fully agree.
Thank you, members. So that brings us on to number 4.6, which is the final application to review today. And I'll ask Mr. Burton if he can introduce this one for us.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take you through the pictures first. Okay, the application site is on the opposite side of the road from the Blairgowrie Golf Club car park. You can see it's there's an access road leading to a neighbouring cottage situated behind it, and you can see the shape of the cottage. The application property is a kind of elongated L. The next, go on to the next slide, please. So from the main road, it's got a very traditional cottage appearance, which and that pretty much reflects the appearance of the cottage originally, which has been extended. Next slide, please. And the extension is shown here. The cottage was extended down the access road to provide a bigger living area. Next slide, please. Looking at it from the garden side, you can see the original cottage is the part on the left, and the extension is the arm in front of you with the French windows leading onto the garden. Next slide, please. And that's looking at the original cottage with the extension to the right-hand side. Next slide, please. The timber structure you can see to the right is the existing garage. Next slide, please. And there's a metal structure also used as a kind of garage storage area. Beyond that, the wall just beyond that metal structure is the application site boundary, and beyond that you can see the neighbouring cottage. Next slide, please. And that's from the garden looking down towards the road, so you can see that this side of the house where the dormers are proposed is quite visible from that approach. Next slide, please. So, planning permission is sought for an extension to a bungalow on Golf Course Road, Blairgowrie. The house has been extended previously. Currently has a lounge, kitchen, dining room with 3 bedrooms. It has the appearance of a modest cottage-style building. It has an adjacent timber garage and a smaller metal structure accessed off the driveway to the side of the building, which also gives access to a neighbouring house. It's proposed to extend the ground floor to provide a larger lounge dining room area and to allow for the formation of an upper floor, which would have 3 bedrooms, adding to the 3 bedrooms on the ground floor. One of the new bedrooms would be located over the new garage and gym, which would replace the current timber garage. The upstairs accommodation would require the formation of a flat roof, which is proposed to have solar panels. To summarise the applicant's case, the applicant bought the house in November 2021 and sought advice on how structural faults could be remedied and how his family's accommodation needs might be met in a way which is sensitive to the building's character and setting. The existing roof is not fully weatherproof, and the house is thermally inefficient, has a constrained internal layout, and lacks adequate guest accommodation and a home office, and the garage and outbuildings are in a dilapidated condition. Notwithstanding the financial benefits of new build construction, the applicant's appreciation of the character of the older parts of the cottage and its garden features led to a design approach which could retain the best of the original whilst extending in a contemporary way, informed by the form and proportions of the older building. The design incorporates contemporary elements and contrasting materials with the aim of delivering an extension which is purposefully different, but which is compatible with and complementary to the character of the original cottage. The mansard roof provides important circulation space at first floor level. By extending upwards, the proposals limit the overall footprint of the extension, enabling retention of more of the garden amenity space. The design will change the appearance of the cottage, but its original character and proportions are preserved and remain identifiable. Removal of the existing garages represents an improvement. While the Council's guidance on extensions states that in most cases an extension should be a subordinate addition, extensions do not need to be subordinate in all cases. The mansard roof proposed will not be visible from street level, so the property's relationship to adjacent properties would not be affected. In addition, an air source heat pump will provide energy efficient, sustainable space heating. Roof-mounted solar panels will provide on-site energy generation. Replacement windows and thermal upgrades of the fabric, together with a modern extension, will improve the energy rating of the building, reducing long-term energy demand and consumption. Opportunity is also taken to incorporate extensive glazing to the southeast facing wall and roof slope to maximize passive solar gain. Replacing UPVC windows with timber, together with the use of Scottish larch as a finishing material for walls and roofs, delivers a sustainable approach to construction. To summarise the report of handling, Strawberry Bank is a detached cottage located on Golf Course Road. The property has the appearance of a lodge house, as it has modest proportions and sits at an acute angle to the road. The proportions, scale, bulk and visual massing of the proposed extension would overwhelm the modest cottage, and the formation of a mansard roof design would be an incongruous feature, which would significantly detract from its character and appearance. The incongruous appearance of the mansard roof extension would be exacerbated by the introduction of contrasting finishing materials and large box dormers. The proposals raise several concerns in relation to the extent of accommodation sought, which goes well beyond the development potential of the cottage, resulting in its overdevelopment. Accordingly, the proposed extensions would be unsympathetic to and would overdevelop the existing cottage. The proposals would have a dominating effect on the cottage and an adverse impact on the character and visual amenity of the area. Therefore, it's contrary to the Perth and Kinross Placemaking Guide, policies 1A, 1BC and 17C of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan. There were no representations. Material considerations, policies 1A and 1B and 17C as identified are relevant. Observations on the application. The original cottage has been extended previously in a manner which does not provide ideal accommodation for the new owner. The decision before the committee is whether the new extensions proposed are so significant compared to the appearance and character of the original cottage that they are contrary to the Council's guidance and policies, which seek to ensure that new development contributes positively to the quality of the built environment. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Councillor Anderson, any questions?
Just looking at the site plan, and I think you said there's what occupied area that is on site now. The redeveloped site will not really occupy any more ground area. Is that correct?
The plans show that the, if you like, the elongated arm of the cottage, which stretches down the access road that leads to the neighbouring cottage, you can see there's an area of garden ground which is a sort of light brown colour on the picture before you. That would be extended into, so that part of the garden ground would be covered by the new development, by the new development. The garden ground beyond that, which is shown in the drawings, in the picture there as having trees on it and darker shades, that would remain.
I was looking at that. There's a garage building to the west end, and then a kind of concentrated metal building on site, white on site as well. Which is that? Are they both shown there? And they'll be incorporated or removed by whatever's going to happen or planned to happen.
That's correct, Councillor. They're both shown there. The darker square one with the arrow is just now, that's the garage, the timber garage, that will be removed. The other building, which is to the north of that, where the arrow is at the moment, that will be removed, and that will be used as a sort of carport area, a car parking area in the new plans. Now, the garage which would be removed would be replaced with a new garage and gym. It would be a slightly larger structure than the existing because it would have accommodation on the upper floor, which would link to the main house.
Sorry, a lot of the roads on Golf Course Road have been extended over the years. It's been a large input of money to properties on that road. So there's no extent. Roof level line is not increased overall. Is that right?
I think it can be the impact of the new development in that context. I think can be seen if you look at page 817 of the papers. It shows an existing. It shows two photographs. Well, it shows 4 photographs. 2 of them existing, 2 of them proposed or visualizations of the new one. Now, if you look at the existing view B, that's the top left photograph. That shows the existing house and the existing garage as a kind of existing garage is a kind of lean-to, as a lean-to sloping roof, sloping away from the house. Now, and if you look at the drawing underneath that, the new the proposed house would have a new roof, which would be the same level, the same ridge height as the existing roof, but would be closer to the road than the existing roof. And the roof above the garage would be larger in order to accommodate a bedroom above the garage, which would be linked into the new extended roof of the main house. So the ridge height, you're quite correct, Councillor, the ridge height wouldn't change on the existing house, but there would be a new roof built to the same ridge height closer to the road, which incorporates the square box dormer that you can see on visualization B, the bottom left photograph. And the biggest change, I would suggest, from traffic approaching along that road would be the new higher roof on top of the garage, or on the new building, which replaced the existing garage.
Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Following on from my colleague Councillor Anderson's question, the garden area, I was noting from one of the photographs, we're not actually losing any green areas, which we help with soak away with rainwater and what have you. The area that the proposed is moving into what looked like a kind of slabbed area. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
I think you're right, Councillor. If we could maybe scroll through the pictures again, please. And I think it's the 3rd picture in, no, on my presentation. That might show that. So if we could go back through the pictures again, please. Yes, that one there. That shows, I think, what you're saying. The area which is directly in front of the French windows and the extension, that would be extended into roughly as far as the lean-to box extension to the left of that, if you can follow me. So that area is, you're quite correct, is paved, and the area which wouldn't be extended into, which you can see is quite green there, is the grassed area of the garden. So the part of the outside area which would be built on is currently largely slabbed. You're correct.
Thank you. And what you were describing to Councillor Anderson as well, that obviously that one angled mono-slope garage, we're not really increasing the rain catchment area because that's already, that extension might sort of more or less fit into that area.
That's correct. The one bit where we are where the proposal would entail losing some rain catchment area would be on the slabbed area, because of course rainwater drains away from there at the moment. If the mansard roof had been a green roof, that would be a way of addressing that, but it's shown as being as having solar panels, so that wouldn't allow for the same kind of amelioration of rainwater runoff as if it had been a green roof or a sedum roof.
Thank you.
Just one question, Mr. Burton. I went there, obviously had a quick site visit. This extension, which we're looking at now with the French windows in, it seems quite narrow when you look at it from on one end. Not particularly practical, perhaps, for a modern day family home, would you say?
It does have a narrow appearance. It's the current home has 3 bedrooms and a lounge and a living area. I think from memory. So, you know, it would be big enough for some uses. Clearly, the applicant is looking for an extension to that, including 3 extra bedrooms. So to allow one of the bedrooms perhaps to be used as an office, but which, you know, a lot of modern homes seek. So yeah, I can imagine that internally it would be quite restrictive because the original cottage was really quite small.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got no further questions. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Anderson.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Stewart.
Proceed.
And I'm happy to proceed as well, so I'll start on this one. I did have a site visit last week, and also had a chance to talk to neighbours who came out to wonder who I was looking around the property. And they gave me a little bit of history that their own house was, they've been there for 40 years, their own house was similar to what was been the original property of this without the extension on it. Just basically a 2-room house, which they've obviously extended, as you can see from the aerial photographs, and the previous owners have extended this one. They were surprised that the application had been refused, as they felt it would be an advantage to it, but that's obviously their opinion. Looking at it myself, as I said, I've asked the question, it does look quite a narrow extension for a house and for families of this day and age. Looking through that, looking at the plans we have, I am of a mind, I think on this occasion, once today, to overturn the decision by the planning officer and grant the appeal. Yes, it will make the house look different, but there are no standards along Golf Course Road. Every house is different. I would suggest probably almost all of them have been extended in one way or another, including the use of dormer windows in some of them. And there's no exact building line either. So I think on this occasion, I'm happy to overturn the decision and grant the appeal. The new extension will utilise photoelectric cells, solar cells, solar panels, and also air source heat pumps, which obviously have their own effect on mitigating climate change. But overall, the design seems to be acceptable. It will be seen from the road, obviously, but as I say, there is no standard design along this road at all. So on this occasion and for today, to grant the appeal on this case. Councillor Anderson.
Wholly concur with the convener's comments. Hopefully see will appeal sustained, and we'll see a much better house in this location shortly, hopefully.
And Councillor Stewart.
I would be minded to grant the appeal. I'm gratified to see that this development is taking in 3 measures to mitigate against climate change. I think going around the area that this would tie in with many buildings in the area. I can understand where the Perth and Kinross officers are coming from the original design, but the cottage has been extended already, and I feel that this would be a further enhancement to the original cottage and, as I said, to climate mitigation.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision this time again to overturn the original decision. I presume with standard conditions that would be placed on for an extension.
Yes, Commissioner, I think the unanimous decision to grant subject to suitable conditions and formalities, of course. And my understanding is that you consider it accords with the development plan. Okay.
And with that one, members, we come to the end of today's session. So it remains for me to only say thank you very much for my two colleagues to sit with us today. Thank you, Mr. Burton, Mr. Elliott, and Mrs. Guild, for your time with us today. And we will see you on the next one, which I believe is going to be in June this time. So we'll see you then. Thank you very much for today.